A beggar forced his daughter to work in a cruel way, but she had no idea who was watching. Little did she know that her harsh reality was about to change forever, but would it be for better or for worse? The relentless sun beat down on the crowded streets of Mumbai, its merciless rays seeming to seek out the most vulnerable. Among the bustling throngs of people, a small figure moved with purpose, her bare feet expertly navigating the scorching pavement. Priya was only 6 years old, but her eyes held a weariness that belied her tender age. In her arms, she clutched a battered cardboard box containing a few remaining packages of colorful candies. The sweet scent that wafted from the box was a cruel reminder of a treat she had never tasted. Priya's stomach growled fiercely, a familiar ache that she had long since learned to ignore. As she weaved through the crowd, Priya's gaze darted nervously to the corner where her father waited. Raj sat on the dirty ground, his bloodshot eyes scanning the area with cold calculation. Even from a distance, Priya could feel the weight of his expectations pressing down on her small shoulders. A businessman in a crisp suit brushed past her, nearly knocking the box from her grasp. Priya stumbled but managed to keep her footing, her heart racing. She couldn't afford to drop even a single candy, not when every rupee meant the difference between a night with or without her father's anger. "Candy, sir?" she called out weakly, her voice barely audible above the cacophony of car horns and shouting vendors. The man didn't even glance in her direction as he hurried past. Priya's shoulders slumped, but she pressed on. The sun continued its assault, and she could feel her skin burning. Her feet, calloused from years of walking barefoot, left small dusty imprints on the pavement. Each step was a reminder of the life she led, a life of constant movement, never resting, always searching for the next sale, the next meal, the next moment of temporary safety. As she approached a busy intersection, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery wafted towards her. Priya's mouth watered involuntarily, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to sink her teeth into a warm, soft roll. The fantasy was short-lived, brutally cut short by the harsh reality of her empty stomach and the meager contents of her candy box. A group of children around her age ran past, laughing and chasing each other. They were dressed in clean school uniforms, their hair neatly combed, their feet protected by shiny black shoes. Priya watched them with a mixture of longing and confusion. Their world seemed as alien to her as the moon, visible but utterly unreachable. One of the girls in the group noticed Priya staring and slowed her pace. For a brief moment their eyes met. Priya saw curiosity in the other girl's gaze, perhaps even a flicker of concern. But before any words could be exchanged, the girl's mother appeared, gently but firmly guiding her daughter away from the ragged street child. Priya felt a familiar ache in her chest, a pain she couldn't quite name but that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. It was a feeling of being invisible, of being less than human in the eyes of those around her. She clutched her candy box tighter, using it as a shield against the indifference of the world. As the day wore on, Priya's hopes of meeting her father's demands dwindled. The knot of fear in her stomach grew tighter with each rejection, each person who walked by without a second glance. She knew what awaited her if she failed to bring in enough money: harsh words, cruel hands, and the gnawing pain of an empty belly. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that Priya barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to the next potential customer, the next opportunity to avoid her father's wrath. As she approached the corner where Raj waited, her steps became slower, her breathing more labored. Priya's father rose to his feet as she drew near, his eyes immediately zeroing in on the still full candy box. She could see the anger building in his face, the disappointment and frustration that always seemed to be directed at her. "Useless girl," he spat, snatching the box from her hands. "Can't even sell a few sweets. What good are you?" Priya flinched at his words, but remained silent. She had learned long ago that tears and protests only fueled his anger. Instead, she stood still, her eyes fixed on the ground, waiting for whatever punishment he deemed fit. As Raj began to berate her, his voice rising above the din of the street, neither of them noticed the sleek black car that had pulled up to the nearby traffic light, nor did they see the man inside, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him with a mixture of shock and growing concern. For Priya, it was just another moment in an endless stream of hardship and fear. But unknown to her, this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. As the light turned green and the car inched forward, the wheels of fate had already been set in motion, promising a future beyond anything Priya could have imagined in her young, weary heart. Aditya Sharma sat in the back of his luxury sedan, his mind a million miles away from the traffic-choked streets of Mumbai. As the CEO of one of India's fastest-growing tech companies, his thoughts were usually consumed by market projections, board meetings, and innovation strategies. But today, something had pulled him out of his bubble of success and privilege, forcing him to confront a reality he had long chosen to ignore. The car crawled to a stop at a red light, and Aditya's gaze drifted to the sidewalk. What he saw there made his breath catch in his throat. A small girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, stood with her head bowed as a man, presumably her father, berated her mercilessly. The contrast between the child's fragile frame and the man's towering anger was stark and disturbing. Aditya leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concern. He had seen street children before, of course. It was an unavoidable part of life in Mumbai, but something about this girl struck him deeply. Perhaps it was the resignation in her posture, the way she seemed to accept the man's abuse as if it were as natural as breathing. Or maybe it was the memory of his own daughter, safe at home with every advantage life could offer, that made this scene so unbearable. As he watched, the man grabbed the girl's arm roughly, causing her to stumble. Aditya's hand moved instinctively to the door handle, a surge of protective anger rising in his chest. But before he could act, his driver's voice broke through his thoughts. "Sir, the light is green." Aditya hesitated, torn between the urge to intervene and the ingrained habit of moving forward, of not getting involved in the messy realities of street life. In that moment of indecision, the car began to move, and the girl and her tormentor faded from view. But the image of that small, battered figure remained burned in Aditya's mind. As the car navigated through the busy streets, he found himself unable to shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something profoundly wrong, something that demanded action. "Turn around," he said suddenly, his voice tight with resolve. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, confusion evident in his eyes. "Sir?" "Turn the car around," Aditya repeated, more firmly this time. "Back to that last intersection." As the car made a careful U-turn, Aditya's mind raced. What exactly did he plan to do? He had no experience with social work or child welfare. His world was one of boardrooms and tech innovations, not street-level interventions. And yet the thought of simply driving away, of returning to his comfortable life while that child suffered, was suddenly unthinkable. The car pulled up to the curb, and Aditya stepped out, his expensive shoes meeting the dusty pavement. He scanned the area, heart pounding, afraid that the girl and her abuser might have disappeared. But there they were, just a few meters away, the man still gesticulating angrily while the child cowered. Taking a deep breath, Aditya approached them. As he drew near, he could hear the man's words, a stream of invective that made his blood boil. The girl noticed him first, her eyes widening in a mixture of fear and confusion at the sight of this well-dressed stranger. "Excuse me," Aditya said, his voice calm but firm. The man whirled to face him, surprise quickly giving way to suspicion. "What do you want?" he growled, positioning himself between Aditya and the girl. Aditya faltered for a moment, realizing he hadn't thought this far ahead. What could he say? What right did he have to interfere? But then his gaze fell on the girl again, and he saw something in her eyes. A tiny flicker of hope, perhaps, or simply the desperate plea of a child in need. "I couldn't help but notice," Aditya began, choosing his words carefully. "Is everything all right here?" The man's face darkened. "This is none of your business, rich man. Go back to your fancy car and leave us alone." But Aditya stood his ground. "I'm concerned about the child's welfare," he said, his voice gaining strength. "The way you were treating her." "She's my daughter," the man spat. "I'll treat her how I like." The girl flinched at these words, and something inside Aditya snapped. In that moment, he knew he couldn't walk away, couldn't pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen. "Being a father doesn't give you the right to abuse a child," he said, reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the authorities." The man's eyes widened in panic, and he made a move as if to grab the girl and run. But Aditya was faster, stepping between them as he dialed the police. What followed was a blur of activity. Police arrived, questions were asked, and the girl, Priya Aditya learned, was taken into protective custody. The man, revealed to be not her father but an exploitative guardian, was arrested, all the while hurling threats and curses. Through it all, Aditya stayed with Priya, offering what comfort he could to the terrified child. As the police prepared to take her to a shelter, he made a split-second decision that would alter the course of both their lives. "I'll take responsibility for her," he heard himself saying, "until a more permanent solution can be found." The officers looked at him skeptically, but Aditya's reputation and status carried weight. After a flurry of phone calls and hastily signed documents, he found himself leading a silent, wide-eyed Priya to his waiting car. As they drove away from the scene, Aditya's mind whirled with the implications of what he'd just done. He glanced at Priya, huddled in the seat beside him, her small frame dwarfed by the leather upholstery. She looked lost, afraid, and yet there was something else in her expression, a glimmer of wonder perhaps at this sudden dramatic turn in her young life. Aditya felt a surge of protectiveness mixed with a determination he hadn't known he possessed. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not let this child down. Whatever it took, he would ensure that Priya got the chance she deserved, the chance that every child deserved, to grow, to learn, and to thrive. As the car merged into the flow of traffic, carrying them towards an uncertain but hopeful future, Aditya made a silent vow. He would use every resource at his disposal, every ounce of his influence and wealth, to make a difference, not just for Priya, but for all the forgotten children of Mumbai's streets. It was a daunting task, but as he looked at the small girl beside him, Aditya felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd ever known. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But in that moment, as the sun set over the bustling city, a new chapter was beginning, not just for Priya and Aditya, but for countless others whose lives they would touch in the years to come. Priya sat rigid in the plush leather seat of Aditya's car, her small hands clutching the edges, as if she feared she might be thrown out at any moment. The vehicle glided smoothly through the chaotic Mumbai traffic, but to Priya, it felt like she was hurtling through space, leaving behind the only world she had ever known. She stole glances at the man beside her. Aditya, he had said his name was. He wore clothes finer than any she had seen up close, and his manner was gentle, so different from the rough handling she was accustomed to. But experience had taught Priya that kindness could be fleeting, that it often came with a price she couldn't afford to pay. As the car turned into a quieter, tree-lined street, Priya's anxiety mounted. Where were they going? What would happen to her now? The buildings here were larger, cleaner, more imposing than anything in her usual haunts. She felt small and out of place, like a speck of dust on an immaculate floor. Finally, the car pulled up to a grand house. No, Priya corrected herself, a mansion. It was bigger than any building she had ever imagined living in, with gleaming windows and a manicured garden. As Aditya guided her gently from the car, Priya's legs trembled beneath her. This couldn't be real. Any moment now, she would wake up in her usual alley, the harsh reality of her life reasserting itself. But the dream, if that's what it was, persisted. Aditya led her into the house and Priya blinked in the sudden brightness. Everything was clean, polished, beautiful. The floor beneath her dirty feet was cool marble, and she was acutely aware of the trail of dust she was leaving behind. A woman appeared, Aditya's wife, Priya guessed. She was beautiful, dressed in a flowing salwar kameez, her eyes wide with surprise as she took in the scene before her. "Aditya, what?" she began, but her husband cut her off with a gentle shake of his head. "Sunita, this is Priya," he said softly. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Sunita's gaze softened as she looked at Priya, taking in her ragged clothes and wary expression. Without a word, she knelt down to Priya's level, her smile warm and inviting. "Hello, Priya," she said gently. "You must be hungry. Would you like something to eat?" At the mention of food, Priya's stomach growled loudly, causing her to blush with embarrassment. But Sunita just laughed softly, standing and holding out her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Priya took it, allowing herself to be led to the kitchen. What followed was like a dream. Priya sat at a table larger than the entire space she used to sleep in, watching in awe as Sunita prepared a simple meal of rice, dal, and vegetables. The aromas that filled the kitchen were intoxicating, making Priya's mouth water uncontrollably. When the food was placed before her, Priya hesitated, looking to Aditya and Sunita for permission. At their encouraging nods, she began to eat, at first slowly, and then with increasing urgency as her body responded to the nourishment it had been denied for so long. As she ate, Priya became aware of Aditya and Sunita talking in low voices nearby. She caught fragments of their conversation, words like authorities and paperwork and temporary guardianship, but she was too focused on the miracle of the food before her to pay much attention. After she had eaten her fill, more food than she could ever remember having at one time, Sunita gently suggested a bath. Priya froze at this, memories of cold water from public taps and harsh scrubbing flooding her mind. But what followed was nothing like those experiences. The bathroom was larger than any room Priya had ever been in, with gleaming tiles and a tub that could have fit several of her. Warm water flowed from the taps, and Sunita helped her wash away years of grime and hardship. As the dirt swirled away down the drain, Priya felt as if layers of her old life were being stripped away, leaving her raw and new and frightened. Wrapped in a soft towel, her skin tingling from the unaccustomed cleanliness, Priya was led to a bedroom. A real bed awaited her, piled high with pillows and blankets. Clean clothes, new clothes, had been laid out for her. "These belong to our daughter, Asha," Sunita explained softly as she helped Priya into the clothes. "She's a bit older than you now, but these should fit well enough for tonight." Priya ran her hands over the soft fabric, marveling at the feeling against her skin. She had never worn anything so clean, so new. It felt alien, as if she were putting on someone else's life along with the clothes. As Sunita tucked her into bed, Priya felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The events of the day, the shock of her sudden change in circumstances, and the fullness in her belly all combined to make her eyelids heavy. But as sleep began to claim her, a sudden panic gripped Priya's heart. What if this was all a dream? What if she woke up back on the streets cold and hungry and alone? The thought was too much to bear, and she began to tremble, tears welling up in her eyes. Sunita, sensing her distress, sat on the edge of the bed and began to stroke Priya's hair gently. "Shh, it's all right," she murmured. "You're safe now. Sleep, little one. Everything will be better in the morning." Priya wanted to believe her, wanted desperately to trust in the kindness of these strangers, but years of hardship and betrayal had taught her to be wary, to expect the worst. As she drifted off to sleep, her small body still tense with fear and uncertainty, Priya couldn't quite shake the feeling that this was all too good to be true, that at any moment the harsh reality of her life would reassert itself, shattering this fragile dream of safety and comfort. In the hallway outside, Aditya and Sunita spoke in hushed tones, their faces etched with concern and determination. "We can't send her back to the streets, Aditya," Sunita said firmly. "You've seen how she's lived. We have to do something." Aditya nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I've already started the process for temporary guardianship. But it's complicated, Sunita. There will be investigations, questions about our motivations, and Priya herself, she's been through so much, it won't be easy to earn her trust." Sunita took her husband's hand, squeezing it gently. "Since when have you ever shied away from a challenge? We'll face this together one day at a time. That child needs us, Aditya, and perhaps we need her too." As they stood there in the quiet hallway, the weight of their decisions settling over them, neither Aditya nor Sunita could have predicted the ways in which their lives would be transformed by the small, frightened girl sleeping in the next room. The road ahead would be long and often difficult, but in that moment, a seed of hope had been planted, a hope that would grow to touch not just their lives, but the lives of countless others in the years to come. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across Priya's sleeping form. For a moment, as consciousness slowly returned, she lay still, savoring the softness of the bed and the warmth of the blankets. Then, with a jolt, the events of the previous day came rushing back, and her eyes flew open in panic. To her amazement and relief, she found herself still in the beautiful room, surrounded by comfort she had never known. It hadn't been a dream after all, but with that realization came a fresh wave of fear and uncertainty. What would happen now? How long would this last before she was cast back onto the streets? A soft knock at the door made Priya sit up quickly, her heart racing. Sunita entered, her smile warm and reassuring. "Good morning, Priya," she said gently. "Did you sleep well?" Priya nodded hesitantly, still not trusting herself to speak. Sunita didn't seem to mind, moving about the room with a quiet efficiency as she opened the curtains and laid out some clothes. "I thought we might go shopping today," Sunita continued, her tone light and conversational. "To get you some clothes of your own. Would you like that?" The idea of new clothes, her very own, was almost too much for Priya to comprehend. She nodded again, a bit more enthusiastically this time, and was rewarded with a bright smile from Sunita. As they prepared for the day, Priya found herself constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Surely this kindness couldn't last. Every gentle touch, every soft word from Sunita seemed to chip away at the walls Priya had built around her heart, and that terrified her. The shopping trip was an overwhelming experience. The mall was unlike anything Priya had ever seen, a glittering palace of lights and sounds and smells. She clung to Sunita's hand, wide-eyed and silent as they moved from store to store. Sunita patiently helped her try on outfit after outfit, always asking for Priya's opinion, always treating her choices with respect. By the time they left laden with bags, Priya felt a warmth in her chest that she couldn't quite name, a feeling of being valued, of being seen as a person rather than a burden. But old habits die hard, and as they drove home, Priya's fears began to resurface. What if this was all a trick? What if Aditya and Sunita expected something in return for their kindness? The memory of harsh hands and cruel words echoed in her mind, making her shrink into herself. Sunita, noticing the change in Priya's demeanor, reached out to touch her hand gently. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Priya hesitated, the words catching in her throat, but something in Sunita's kind eyes gave her the courage to speak. Why are you being so nice to me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sunita's heart broke at the fear and confusion in Priya's voice. She chose her words carefully, understanding the weight they carried. "Because every child deserves love and kindness, Priya. You've been through so much and it's not fair. We want to help you, to give you the chance to be happy and safe." Priya absorbed these words, turning them over in her mind. She wanted so badly to believe them, but years of hardship had taught her that nothing came without a price. "But what do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sunita's eyes filled with tears at the implication behind Priya's question. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face the frightened child fully. "Oh, Priya," she said softly, "we don't want anything from you except for you to be yourself, to grow, to learn, to be happy. That's all." As Sunita gathered Priya into a gentle hug, the dam finally broke. Years of pent-up fear, pain and longing poured out of Priya in great heaving sobs. She cried for the childhood she had lost, for the hunger and fear she had endured, and for the glimmer of hope that was now, against all odds, blooming in her heart. Sunita held her through it all, murmuring soft words of comfort and reassurance. As Priya's sobs gradually subsided, she felt something shift inside her, a tiny seed of trust taking root, fragile but persistent. Back at the house, Aditya was waiting for them. He had spent the morning in meetings with lawyers and child welfare officials, navigating the complex process of becoming Priya's legal guardians. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with bureaucratic hurdles and probing questions about their motivations. But as he watched Sunita lead a red-eyed but calmer Priya into the house, he knew with absolute certainty that they were doing the right thing. That evening, as Priya lay in bed, surrounded by her new clothes and toys, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that this could be her life. That she could have a home, a family, a future. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. As sleep began to claim her, Priya made a silent promise to herself. She would try to trust, to open her heart to the kindness being offered. It wouldn't be easy. The shadows of her past still loomed large. But for the first time in her young life, Priya dared to hope for something better. In the quiet of the night, as Priya slept peacefully, Aditya and Sunita sat in the living room, discussing the challenges that lay ahead. They knew that helping Priya heal from her traumatic past would be a long and often difficult journey. But as they talked, their resolve only strengthened. They would face whatever came together, united in their commitment to giving this child, and others like her, the chance for a brighter future. Little did they know that their decision to help one small girl would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only their lives, but the lives of countless others. The journey ahead would be filled with obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But it would also be a journey of profound transformation, hope, and the enduring power of compassion to change the world, one life at a time. As the days turned into weeks, Priya slowly began to adjust to her new life in the Sharma household. Each morning she would wake up half expecting to find herself back on the streets, but the soft bed and warm blankets remained reassuringly real. Slowly, tentatively, she began to let down her guard, allowing herself to experience the simple joys of childhood that had been denied to her for so long. Aditya and Sunita watched her transformation with a mixture of joy and heartache. They celebrated every small victory. The first time Priya laughed without immediately silencing herself, the day she asked for seconds at dinner without fear of punishment, the moment she reached for Sunita's hand without hesitation. But they also grieved for the innocence that had been stolen from her, the scars that ran deep beneath her fragile smiles. One sunny afternoon, about a month after Priya's arrival, Aditya came home early from work to find Sunita and Priya in the garden. Sunita was teaching Priya how to plant flower seeds, their hands dirty as they patted soil into small pots. The sight of Priya's focused expression, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on her task, made Aditya's heart swell with affection. As he watched, Priya looked up and caught sight of him. For a moment, he saw a flicker of the old fear cross her face, a reflexive response to an adult male presence. But then, to his amazement and delight, Priya's face broke into a genuine smile. "Aditya!" she called out, waving a dirt-covered hand. "Look what we're doing." It was the first time she had addressed him by name, the first time she had initiated an interaction without prompting. Aditya felt a lump form in his throat as he crossed the garden to join them. "That looks wonderful, Priya," he said, kneeling down beside her. "What are you planting?" As Priya launched into an excited explanation of the different flower seeds they were using, Aditya caught Sunita's eye over the child's head. The joy and hope he saw, reflected there, mirrored his own feelings. It was a small moment, but a significant one, a sign that Priya was beginning to feel safe, to trust, to belong. But the road to healing was not always smooth. Nightmares plagued Priya's sleep, causing her to wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, and calling out for help that had never come in her previous life. On those nights, Aditya and Sunita would take turns sitting with her, offering comfort and reassurance until she could sleep again. There were also moments of regression, when the weight of her past experiences would come crashing down on Priya, causing her to retreat into herself, to flinch at sudden movements or loud noises. During these times, Aditya and Sunita learned to be patient, to give Priya the space she needed, while still ensuring she knew they were there for her. As Priya's emotional wounds began to heal, Aditya and Sunita turned their attention to her education. Years of living on the streets had left Priya far behind her peers academically. They hired a private tutor, a kind-hearted woman named Ms. Mehra, to help Priya catch up. At first, Priya was resistant to learning, frustrated by her own perceived inadequacies. But Ms. Mehra was patient and creative in her approach. She incorporated games and hands-on activities into her lessons, slowly kindling Priya's natural curiosity and intelligence. One evening, about 2 months into her tutoring, Priya burst into the living room where Aditya and Sunita were reading. Her eyes were shining with excitement as she thrust a paper into Aditya's hands. "Look," she exclaimed, "I wrote my name all by myself." Aditya looked down at the paper, where Priya was written in large, wobbly letters. The sight of those 5 simple letters filled him with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, yes, but also a profound sense of the trust Priya was placing in them, in this new life they were building together. "This is wonderful, Priya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Priya beamed at the praise, her whole face lighting up. But then, as quickly as it had come, the smile faded, replaced by a look of uncertainty. "Aditya," she said hesitantly. "Sunita, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sunita replied, setting aside her book. "How you can ask us anything. Priya took a deep breath, her small hands twisting nervously in her shirt. Am I going to stay here? With you? Or will I have to go back? She couldn't finish the sentence, but the fear in her eyes spoke volumes. Aditya and Sunita exchanged a quick glance, a silent conversation passing between them. They had been waiting for this moment, knowing it would come eventually. Aditya knelt down in front of Priya, taking her small hands in his. Priya, he said gently, if you want to, you can stay with us for as long as you like. Forever, if that's what you want. We've been talking to some people, and if it's okay with you, we'd like to adopt you, to make you officially part of our family. Priya's eyes widened, a mix of emotions flashing across her face. Hope, disbelief, fear, and something that looked a lot like longing. Really? She whispered. You want me? Sunita joined them, wrapping an arm around Priya's shoulders. We want you very much, Priya, she said softly. We love you, and we want you to be our daughter, but only if that's what you want too. For a long moment, Priya was silent, her gaze darting between Aditya and Sunita, as if searching for any sign of deception. Then, with a small sob, she threw herself into their arms, clinging to them as if afraid they might disappear. Yes, she cried, her voice muffled against Aditya's shirt. Yes, I want to stay. I want to be your daughter. As they held Priya between them, Aditya and Sunita felt the full weight of the commitment they were making. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal hurdles to overcome, emotional challenges to face, and the constant work of helping Priya heal from her past traumas. But in that moment, as they embraced the little girl who had so unexpectedly become the center of their world, they knew with absolute certainty that they were on the right path. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow through the windows, the Sharma family, now 3 instead of 2, remained huddled together, each silently marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. For Priya, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a life filled with love, security, and the promise of a brighter future. For Aditya and Sunita, it was the start of a journey that would change not only their lives, but the lives of countless others in ways they had yet to imagine. In the quiet of that evening, as Priya's breathing evened out and she fell asleep in their arms, Aditya and Sunita shared a look of determination. They had taken the first steps on this new path, and they were committed to seeing it through, not just for Priya, but for all the children out there who needed a chance, a home, a family to call their own. As the weeks turned into months, the Sharma household settled into a new rhythm. Priya's presence had brought a vibrancy and joy to their lives that Aditya and Sunita hadn't even realized was missing. But along with the joy came new challenges and responsibilities that tested their resolve and deepened their commitment to their newly formed family. The legal process of adopting Priya proved to be a complex and often frustrating journey. There were mountains of paperwork, probing interviews with social workers, and countless hoops to jump through. Aditya found himself leveraging his business connections and resources in ways he never had before, all in service of securing Priya's future. One particularly trying day, after yet another meeting with lawyers and officials, Aditya returned home feeling drained and discouraged. He found Sunita and Priya in the kitchen, flour dusting their clothes, and laughter filling the air as they attempted to bake cookies together. The sight of them, so carefree and happy, renewed his determination. No matter the obstacles, he would see this through. As Priya's education progressed, her natural intelligence and curiosity began to shine through. Ms. Mehra, her tutor, reported that Priya was making remarkable progress, catching up to her age group at an astonishing rate. But it wasn't just academic knowledge that Priya was gaining. With each passing day, she was learning to trust, to hope, to believe in herself and her place in the world. One evening, as Aditya was helping Priya with her homework, she looked up at him with a serious expression. "Aditya," she said, her voice small but determined, "I want to help other kids like me, kids who don't have anyone to take care of them." Aditya felt a surge of pride and love for this remarkable child. "That's a wonderful idea, Priya," he said, pulling her into a hug. "Maybe we can think of a way to do that together." That conversation planted a seed in Aditya's mind. He began to think beyond Priya, to the countless other children still living on the streets, facing the same hardships and dangers that Priya had endured. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he was in a unique position to make a difference. Over the next few weeks, Aditya threw himself into research. He studied successful models of child welfare programs, consulted with experts in the field, and began to formulate a plan. His vision was ambitious, a foundation that would not only provide immediate aid to street children, but also work towards long-term solutions to break the cycle of poverty and exploitation. Sunita watched her husband's growing passion with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you sure about this, Aditya?" she asked one night as they lay in bed discussing his plans. "It's a noble cause, but it's also a huge undertaking. We have our hands full with Priya as it is." Aditya turned to face her, his eyes shining with determination. "I've never been more sure of anything, Sunita," he said softly. "Priya has opened our eyes to a world we've been ignoring for too long. We have the resources, the connections, the ability to make a real difference. How can we not try?" Sunita smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "You're right," she said. "It won't be easy, but if anyone can do it, it's you. And you won't be doing it alone. We're in this together." With Sunita's support and Priya's inspiration driving him forward, Aditya began to put his plan into action. He reached out to his business contacts, rallying support and resources for his new venture. He hired a team of dedicated professionals, social workers, educators, healthcare providers, all committed to the cause of child welfare. The Sharma Foundation for Child Welfare was officially launched 6 months after Priya had first come into their lives. The foundation's first project was a shelter and education center in one of Mumbai's poorest neighborhoods. It provided a safe haven for street children, offering food, healthcare, education, and most importantly, a chance at a better future. On the day of the shelter's opening, Aditya stood before a small crowd of supporters, journalists, and curious onlookers. Priya stood beside him, her hand clasped tightly in his, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. "Today," Aditya began, his voice strong and clear, "we take a small but significant step towards a better future for our city's most vulnerable children. This shelter is more than just a building. It's a promise that every child deserves love, safety, and the opportunity to reach their full potential." As he spoke, Aditya felt a tugging on his hand. He looked down to see Priya gazing up at him, a question in her eyes. Understanding her unspoken request, he nodded and lifted her up to the microphone. Priya's voice was soft but steady as she addressed the crowd. "I used to be like the kids this place will help," she said. "I was scared and hungry and alone. But then I got lucky. I found a family who loved me and gave me a chance. I want every kid to have that chance. Thank you for helping make that happen." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd as Priya finished speaking. Her simple, heartfelt words drove home the importance of the work they were embarking on in a way that no polished speech could have done. As the day wore on and Aditya watched children tentatively entering the shelter, hope dawning in their eyes, he felt a profound sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. There was so much more work to be done, so many more lives to touch. That night, as he tucked Priya into bed, she looked up at him with a sleepy smile. "I'm proud of you, Papa," she said, using the term of endearment for the first time. "You're going to help so many kids." Aditya's heart swelled with love and gratitude. "We're going to help them, Priya," he corrected gently. "All of us together. You've shown us the way." As he turned out the light and closed Priya's door, Aditya felt a renewed sense of determination. The journey ahead would be challenging, but with his family by his side and the knowledge that they were making a real difference, he was ready to face whatever came their way. Little did Aditya know that the ripples of change set in motion by one small act of kindness were about to grow into waves that would transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The Sharma Foundation was poised to become a catalyst for change, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. And at the heart of it all was a little girl who had once been lost, but was now found. Her story a testament to the transformative power of love and second chances. The Sharma Foundation for Child Welfare had been operating for just over a year, and its impact was already being felt throughout Mumbai. The shelter that had started it all was now at full capacity, providing a safe haven for dozens of former street children. Educational programs were showing promising results, with many children making remarkable progress in their studies. The Foundation's healthcare initiatives were addressing not just immediate medical needs, but also working on preventative care and nutrition programs. Aditya found himself busier than ever, dividing his time between his tech company and the Foundation. He was exhausted but fulfilled, knowing that every day brought new opportunities to make a difference in children's lives. One sweltering afternoon, as Aditya was reviewing plans for a new vocational training center, his assistant burst into his office, her face pale with worry. "Mr. Sharma," she said breathlessly, "there's been an incident at the shelter. A group of men. They're demanding we turn over some of the children. They claim to be their guardians." Aditya felt his blood run cold. He had known this day might come, that the criminal elements who had once exploited these children might try to reclaim them. But the reality of it was still shocking. Without a word, he grabbed his jacket and rushed out of the office. As he sped towards the shelter, his mind raced. They had protocols in place for this kind of situation. But would they be enough? What if the men turned violent? What about the children? How terrified they must be. When he arrived at the shelter, the scene was tense. A group of rough-looking men were shouting at the security guards, while inside, he could see staff members hurrying to secure the children in the safe rooms they had prepared for just such an emergency. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Aditya stepped forward. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm Aditya Sharma, the founder of this foundation. Whatever your concerns are, I'm sure we can discuss them civilly, without frightening the children." The leader of the group, a burly man with a scarred face, turned to Aditya with a sneer. "We don't want to talk," he growled. "We want our kids back. You have no right to keep them from us." Aditya felt a surge of anger at the man's use of the word "our," as if these children were possessions to be claimed. But he kept his voice level. "These children are under the legal protection of the Foundation," he explained. "If you believe you have a legitimate claim to guardianship, we'll be happy to review it through the proper legal channels. But I can assure you, we will not be handing over any child to anyone without thorough verification and the children's consent." The man's face darkened with rage. He took a menacing step towards Aditya, his fists clenched. "You think your fancy lawyers and your money can stop us?" he snarled. "We know people too, important people. You're messing with things you don't understand, rich man." For a moment, Aditya felt a flicker of fear. The threat was clear, and he had no doubt these men were capable of following through on it. But then he thought of Priya, of all the children whose lives had been transformed by the Foundation's work. He wouldn't let them down. "I understand perfectly well what I'm doing," Aditya replied, standing his ground. "I'm protecting children from exploitation and abuse. If you want to challenge that, go ahead. But know this, we will fight you every step of the way. These children are not commodities to be traded or used. They are human beings with rights, and we will defend those rights with everything we have." A tense silence followed his words. The men glared at Aditya, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the leader spat on the ground at Aditya's feet. "This isn't over," he growled before signaling to his companions. As they retreated, shouting threats and obscenities, Aditya felt his legs go weak with relief. But he knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation had brought home the reality of the powerful forces they were up against. Criminal networks that profited from the exploitation of children, corrupt officials who could be bought, a system that often turned a blind eye to the suffering of its most vulnerable members. As he entered the shelter to check on the children and staff, Aditya's mind was already racing with plans. They would need to increase security, strengthen their legal team, perhaps even hire private investigators to gather evidence against these criminal networks. It would be expensive and dangerous, but there was no alternative. They had made a commitment to these children, and they would see it through no matter the cost. That evening, as Aditya recounted the day's events to Sunita and Priya over dinner, he was struck by the contrast between the tense confrontation at the shelter and the peaceful domesticity of his home. Priya listened with wide eyes, her fork forgotten in her hand. "Were you scared, Papa?" she asked, her voice small. Aditya considered lying, but he knew Priya deserved the truth. "Yes, I was," he admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what's right. Sometimes it makes it even more important to stand your ground." Priya nodded solemnly, absorbing his words. Then, to Aditya's surprise, She got up from her chair and came around the table to hug him tightly. "I'm glad you're helping those kids," she said, "even if it's scary sometimes." As he held his daughter close, Aditya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and dangers he was only beginning to understand. But with Priya's love and Sunita's unwavering support, he knew he had the strength to face whatever came their way. Later that night, as Aditya lay awake, his mind churning with plans and worries, he felt Sunita's hand slip into his. "We'll figure this out," she whispered in the darkness. "Together, just like we always have." Aditya squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words for her steadfast presence. As he finally drifted off to sleep, he held on to that thought. Together, whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them as a family, bound by love and a shared commitment to making the world a little bit better, one child at a time. Little did Aditya know that the confrontation at the shelter was just the first ripple in a much larger wave of change that was about to sweep through their lives and the lives of countless others. The challenges ahead would test their resolve, their resources, and their faith in humanity. But they would also open doors to unexpected allies, uncover hidden strengths, and ultimately lead to transformations more profound than any of them could have imagined. The months following the confrontation at the shelter were a whirlwind of activity for the Sharma family and the Foundation. Aditya threw himself into strengthening their defenses, both physical and legal. Security at all Foundation facilities was heightened, and a team of top-notch lawyers was brought on board to handle the increasingly complex legal challenges they faced. But even as they fortified their position, Aditya knew they needed to do more. The incident had made it clear that they were up against powerful, entrenched interests that wouldn't hesitate to use force or intimidation to protect their illicit activities. To truly make a difference, they needed to attack the problem at its roots. It was Sunita who first suggested reaching out to the media. "We need to shine a light on what's really happening," she argued. "The more people know, the harder it will be for these criminals to operate in the shadows." Aditya was initially hesitant, worried about the potential backlash and the impact on the children's privacy. But he soon realized that Sunita was right. They couldn't fight this battle alone. They needed public support, and for that they needed to tell their story. They found an unexpected ally in Nandini Mehta, a crusading journalist known for her hard-hitting exposés on social issues. When Aditya reached out to her, Nandini was immediately intrigued by the Foundation's work and the challenges they faced. "This is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told," she told Aditya during their first meeting. "But I won't sugarcoat it. If we do this, we need to tell the whole truth, no matter how ugly it gets. Are you prepared for that?" Aditya hesitated for only a moment before nodding firmly. "We're ready," he said. "These children deserve nothing less than the whole truth." Over the next few weeks, Nandini practically lived at the Foundation, interviewing staff, volunteers, and with great care and sensitivity, some of the children themselves. Priya, now more confident and articulate, volunteered to share her story, with Aditya and Sunita's cautious approval. The resulting series of articles, published in one of India's most respected newspapers, was a bombshell. Nandini's powerful prose brought to life the harsh realities faced by street children, the criminal networks that exploited them, and the challenges faced by those trying to help. The Sharma Foundation's work was highlighted as a beacon of hope, but the articles also laid bare the daunting obstacles they faced. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The Foundation was flooded with offers of support, volunteers, donations, and messages of encouragement poured in from all over the country. But with the increased visibility came increased scrutiny and, inevitably, pushback from those whose interests were threatened by the Foundation's work. Anonymous threats began to arrive at the Foundation's offices and the Sharma home. Aditya found himself the target of a smear campaign, with rumors and false accusations circulating in certain media outlets. Some of the Foundation's donors, spooked by the controversy, began to withdraw their support. It was during this tumultuous time that Aditya received an unexpected visitor. Rajesh Kapoor, a senior police officer he had met briefly at a charity event, requested a private meeting. "Mr. Sharma," Kapoor said without preamble once they were alone in Aditya's office, "I'm here unofficially. What I'm about to tell you could cost me my job, but I can't stay silent any longer." Over the next hour, Kapoor laid out a disturbing picture of corruption and complicity within the police force and local government. Many officials, he explained, were on the payroll of the same criminal networks that the Foundation was fighting against. "They're scared of what you're doing," Kapoor said. "You're disrupting a system that's been in place for years, and they won't give up without a fight. But you're not alone. There are good people in the force, in the government, who want to see change. We've been waiting for someone like you to come along and shake things up." Aditya listened with a mixture of horror and hope. The scale of the corruption was even worse than he had imagined, but the knowledge that there were allies within the system gave him renewed determination. "What can we do?" he asked Kapoor. "Keep doing what you're doing," Kapoor replied. "But be careful. Document everything. Build a case that's too strong to ignore. And when the time is right, we'll move together." As Kapoor left, Aditya felt the weight of responsibility settle even more heavily on his shoulders. He knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew they couldn't turn back now. That evening, as he shared Kapoor's revelations with Sunita, he saw his own mix of emotions reflected in her eyes. "It's bigger than we thought," Sunita said softly, her hand finding his. "Are we in over our heads, Aditya?" Aditya squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her touch. "Maybe," he admitted. "But think of Priya, of all the children like her. If we don't fight for them, who will?" Sunita nodded, her resolve visibly strengthening. "You're right. We've come too far to give up now. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Over the next few months, the Sharma Foundation became the center of a growing movement. Inspired by Nandini's articles and the Foundation's unwavering commitment despite the threats, more and more people began to speak out against child exploitation and the systems that enabled it. Aditya found himself working around the clock, coordinating with Kapoor and other sympathetic officials, gathering evidence and continuing to expand the Foundation's programs. The pressure was intense, and there were moments when he felt close to breaking. It was during one of these low moments that Priya found him in his study late one night, slumped over his desk, surrounded by piles of documents. "Papa?" she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Aditya looked up, startled. Seeing the concern in his daughter's eyes, he managed a tired smile. "I'm all right, beta. Just a bit overwhelmed." Priya climbed onto his lap, something she hadn't done in a while. At 12, she was growing up fast, but in that moment, she seemed very much like the little girl they had first taken in. "You know," she said, her voice thoughtful, "when I first came here, I didn't believe that things could really change. I thought that's just how the world was. But you and Mama showed me that it doesn't have to be that way. You taught me that we can make things better, even when it's hard." Aditya felt tears prick his eyes as he hugged Priya close. "When did you get so wise, he murmured into her hair. Priya giggled. "I learned from the best." As Priya snuggled against him, Aditya felt his determination renewed. Yes, the challenges ahead were daunting. Yes, they were up against powerful forces that wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to protect their interests. But they were also part of something bigger than themselves, a movement for change that was gaining momentum every day. He thought of all the children the Foundation had helped, of the lives transformed and the futures brightened. He thought of the allies they had found along the way, people like Nandini and Kapoor, who were willing to risk everything for what was right. And he thought of his own family, of Sunita's unwavering support and Priya's remarkable resilience and growing wisdom. With all of that behind him, how could he do anything but press forward? As he carried a sleepy Priya back to her room, Aditya felt a sense of calm determination settle over him. The road ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous, but with love, courage, and the support of those who shared their vision, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did Aditya know that the biggest test of their resolve was yet to come, a crisis that would shake the Foundation to its core and force them all to confront the true cost of the fight they had undertaken. But in that moment, as he tucked Priya into bed and kissed her forehead, all he felt was gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this point, and hope for the battles yet to be won. The calm before the storm lasted barely a week. Aditya was in a meeting with his legal team when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Sunita. "Turn on the news, now." With a sense of foreboding, Aditya excused himself and rushed to his office, flicking on the television. What he saw made his blood run cold. Splashed across the screen was a photo of him with one of the foundation's biggest donors, a respected businessman named Vikram Malhotra. The headline below screamed, "Child welfare or child trafficking? Shocking allegations against Sharma Foundation." As Aditya watched in horror, the news anchor detailed accusations that the foundation was a front for a child trafficking ring, with Aditya and key donors allegedly profiting from the exploitation of vulnerable children. The evidence presented was a mix of doctored photos, out-of-context quotes, and outright fabrications. Aditya's phone began to ring incessantly. Board members, donors, partners, all demanding explanations. Social media exploded with the story, with long-time supporters expressing shock and dismay, while others who had always been skeptical of the foundation's work pounced on the allegations. In the midst of the chaos, Aditya's thoughts turned to the children. How would this affect them? Would they believe these horrible lies? And what about Priya? She was old enough now to understand what was happening. How would she handle seeing her family's name dragged through the mud? As if summoned by his thoughts, Sunita burst into the office, her face pale but determined. "We need to get ahead of this," she said without preamble. "We need to fight back." Aditya nodded, grateful as always for his wife's strength. "You're right. Let's call Nandini. We need her help to get the truth out there." Over the next few hours, the Sharma household became a hive of activity. Lawyers huddled in the study, crafting statements and planning legal action. Nandini arrived with her team, setting up a makeshift newsroom in the living room. Trusted staff members from the foundation came and went, bringing updates and taking instructions. Through it all, Priya watched silently from the sidelines, her young face etched with worry. Finally, as evening fell and the frenzy showed no signs of abating, she approached Aditya. "Papa," she said softly, tugging on his sleeve. "Can I help?" Aditya looked down at his daughter, struck by the determination in her eyes. He knelt down to her level, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Priya, beta, this is a very difficult situation. Are you sure you want to get involved?" Priya nodded firmly. "The foundation helps kids like me, right? Kids who didn't have anyone else? So if people are saying bad things about it, that hurts those kids too. I want to help make it right." Aditya felt a surge of pride, mixed with a twinge of sadness. His little girl had grown up so much, had seen too much of the world's darkness, but she had also inherited their determination to fight for what was right. "Okay," he said, giving her a quick hug. "Let's go talk to Nandini. Maybe you can help tell the real story of what the foundation does." As they walked hand in hand to where Nandini was working, Aditya felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, they were under attack. Yes, the forces arrayed against them were powerful and ruthless. But they had truth on their side, and the strength that comes from fighting for something bigger than themselves. The next few days were a blur of press conferences, interviews, and legal maneuvers. Aditya and Sunita worked tirelessly to counter the false narrative, presenting evidence of the foundation's work and the lives it had changed. Nandini's investigative skills proved invaluable as she began to uncover the sources of the smear campaign and the motivations behind it. But the most powerful moment came when Priya, with her parents' support, decided to speak out. In a carefully managed interview, she told her story of life on the streets, of the hopelessness she had felt, and of the second chance she had been given thanks to the foundation. "The Sharma Foundation didn't traffic me," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her nervousness. "They saved me. And they're saving other kids every day. The people saying these bad things, they're the ones who want to hurt kids. They're scared because the foundation is stopping them from exploiting children." Priya's words, delivered with the unvarnished honesty of youth, struck a chord with the public. Slowly but surely the tide of opinion began to turn. Other children and families who had been helped by the foundation came forward with their stories. Supporters rallied, organizing marches and social media campaigns to defend the foundation's work. But even as they began to make headway in the court of public opinion, Aditya knew that the real battle was just beginning. The smear campaign had been just the opening salvo. Whoever was behind it, whether it was the criminal networks they had disrupted or corrupt officials worried about exposure, they wouldn't give up easily. Late one night, as Aditya and Sunita sat in their kitchen, Finally taking a moment to breathe after another grueling day, Kapoor called with a warning. "They're getting desperate," he said, his voice tense. "My sources tell me they're planning something big. Be careful, Aditya. Watch your back and keep your family safe." As Aditya hung up the phone, he met Sunita's questioning gaze. He saw in her eyes the same mix of fear and determination that he felt. They both knew that they were past the point of no return. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Outside, the city of Mumbai hummed with its usual nighttime energy, unaware of the storm that was brewing. But within the Sharma household, and in the hearts of all those who had dedicated themselves to the Foundation's mission, a quiet resolve was taking hold. They had fought too hard, come too far to give up now. As Aditya and Sunita finally headed to bed, exhausted but unbowed, they paused at Priya's room. Their daughter slept peacefully, her face relaxed in a way it only ever was in sleep. Looking at her, Aditya felt a renewed surge of determination. This was what they were fighting for. Not just for Priya, but for all the children who deserved a chance at a peaceful, hopeful future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever forces were arrayed against them, Aditya knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would not back down. The stakes were too high, the cause too important. With love, courage, and the strength of their convictions, they would weather this storm and emerge stronger on the other side. Little did they know that the true test of their resolve was yet to come, a crisis that would push them to their limits and force them to confront the true cost of the fight they had undertaken. But for now, in the quiet of the night, they allowed themselves a moment of peace, drawing strength from each other and from the knowledge that they were on the right side of this battle. The warning from Kapoor proved prophetic. Just as the public outcry over the false trafficking allegations began to die down, a new crisis erupted that threatened to tear the Foundation apart from within. It began with a series of anonymous emails sent to major donors and board members, alleging financial improprieties within the Foundation. The emails contained detailed financial records, some real, some cleverly falsified, that seemed to show Aditya and other key staff members embezzling funds meant for the children's programs. The effect was immediate and devastating. Several major donors suspended their funding pending an investigation. Board members began to resign, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Even some of the Foundation's most dedicated staff members began to question whether they had been deceived all along. Aditya found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts. He had to reassure panicked staff, placate suspicious authorities, and try to keep the Foundation's programs running even as their resources dwindled. All while knowing that every moment spent defending himself was a moment not spent helping the children who depended on them. The strain began to show on the entire family. Sunita threw herself into damage control, working around the clock to try to trace the source of the leaked documents and prove their inauthenticity. Priya, now well aware of the stakes, became withdrawn and anxious, the light in her eyes dimming as she watched her parents struggle. It was Priya who finally forced them to confront the toll the crisis was taking on their family. One evening, as Aditya and Sunita sat at the dining table surrounded by papers and laptops, arguing in hushed tones about their next move, Priya slammed her textbook shut with surprising force. "Stop it!" she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "Just stop fighting." Aditya and Sunita turned to her in shock, suddenly realizing how absorbed they had become in the crisis, how much they had been neglecting their daughter's needs. "Oh, Priya," Sunita said softly, reaching out to her. "We're not fighting each other, beta. We're just trying to figure out how to fix this mess." Priya shook her head, the tears now flowing freely. "But what if you can't fix it? What if they win? Will we have to stop helping other kids? Will I have to go back?" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Aditya and Sunita understood the fear behind her words. In an instant, they were both at her side, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "Listen to me, Priya," Aditya said firmly, looking into his daughter's eyes. "No matter what happens with the Foundation, you are our daughter. Nothing will ever change that. You will never have to go back to that life, do you understand?" Priya nodded, hiccuping slightly as her sobs subsided. Sunita stroked her hair gently, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And as for the Foundation," Sunita added, "we're not giving up. It's hard right now, yes. But we've faced hard times before, haven't we? And we've always come through them together. As they sat there holding each other close, Aditya felt a shift in his perspective. Yes, the foundation was important. The work they did was vital. But this right here, his family, their love for each other, this was the true foundation of everything. Whatever happened, they would face it as a family. That realization gave Aditya a new energy, a new focus. The next morning he called an emergency meeting of the remaining board members and key staff. But instead of another tense strategy session, he did something unexpected. He told them about the conversation with Priya, about the fear and pain he had seen in his daughter's eyes. "We've been so focused on fighting the accusations, on proving our innocence, that we've lost sight of why we started this work in the first place," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not about us. It's about the children. Every moment we spend defending ourselves is a moment we're not helping them." He paused, looking around at the tired, stressed faces of his team. "I propose we do something radical. Let's open our books completely. Every transaction, every decision laid bare for the world to see. Yes, it might be used against us. Yes, we might have made mistakes along the way, but we have nothing to hide and everything to gain by being transparent." There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a heated debate. But in the end, Aditya's passion and conviction won out. The foundation would embrace radical transparency, inviting independent auditors to examine every aspect of their operations. It was a risky move, but it proved to be a turning point. As the audit progressed, it became clear that while there had been some administrative missteps, inevitable in an organization that had grown so quickly, there was no evidence of deliberate fraud or embezzlement. More importantly, the audit revealed the true extent of the foundation's impact. The thousands of children helped, the lives transformed, the communities uplifted. Slowly but surely, supporters began to return. Donors who had suspended their funding came back, often with increased commitments. The media, impressed by the foundation's openness, began to question the motives of those behind the smear campaign. But the most significant change was within the foundation itself. The crisis had forced them to re-examine every aspect of their operations, to reconnect with their core mission. They emerged stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever to make a difference in the lives of vulnerable children. As the dust began to settle, Aditya found himself sitting in the garden with Priya one evening, watching the sun set over the Mumbai skyline. The city's usual cacophony seemed muted, as if giving them a moment of peace after the tumultuous weeks they had endured. "Papa," Priya said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "are we going to be okay now?" Aditya turned to look at his daughter, struck once again by the maturity in her eyes. She had grown so much, not just in height but in wisdom and resilience. The crisis had taken its toll on all of them, but Priya had shown a strength that continually amazed him. "Yes, beta," he replied, putting an arm around her shoulders. "I think we are. It won't be easy. There's still a lot of work to do, but we're on the right path." Priya nodded, leaning into her father's embrace. "I was scared," she admitted, "not just about the foundation, but I was worried about you and Mama. You both looked so tired and stressed all the time." Aditya felt a pang of guilt at her words. "I'm sorry, Priya. Your mother and we got so caught up in fighting the accusations that we forgot what's really important. But you know what? You helped us remember." "I did." Priya looked up at him, surprise evident in her face. "You did," Aditya confirmed with a smile. "You reminded us why we started this work in the first place. It's not about proving ourselves right or fighting against the bad guys. It's about helping children, giving them the chances they deserve, just like we wanted to do for you." Priya was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Then she sat up straighter, a determined look on her face. "I want to help more," she declared. "Not just by telling my story, but really help. With the foundation's work." Aditya felt a surge of pride mixed with a touch of concern. "Are you sure, beta? It's not always easy work. There's a lot of sadness, a lot of hard things to see and hear." "I know," Priya said solemnly. "But I also know how much it means to have someone believe in you, to give you a chance. I want to do that for other kids." Aditya hugged her tightly, marveling at the compassionate, brave young woman his daughter was becoming. "All right," he said. "We'll find a way for you to get more involved. But school comes first, okay?" Priya nodded eagerly, already starting to brainstorm ideas for how she could contribute. As they sat there, planning and dreaming together, Aditya felt a profound sense of hope. The crisis had been painful, yes, but it had also been clarifying. It had stripped away distractions and forced them to reconnect with their core mission. And it had revealed the strength, not just in their family, but in the community they had built around the foundation. He thought of all the people who had stood by them during the darkest days, Nandini with her relentless pursuit of the truth, Kapoor risking his career to provide crucial information, the staff members who had worked tirelessly, even when their own reputations were on the line, and of course Sunita, his rock, his partner in everything. The foundation had emerged from the crucible stronger, more focused and more determined than ever. But more than that, Aditya realized, they had sparked a movement. The transparency they had embraced was inspiring other organizations to do the same. The conversations they had started about child welfare and systemic change were spreading, gaining momentum. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Aditya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still powerful interests aligned against them, still so many children in need of help. But they were no longer alone in the fight. They had built something bigger than themselves, a community united in the belief that every child deserved a chance at a better future. Priya's voice broke into his thoughts. "Papa," she said, stifling a yawn, "can we go inside? I want to tell Mama about my ideas for the foundation." Aditya chuckled, getting to his feet and offering Priya his hand. "Of course, beta. I'm sure she'll be just as excited as I am to hear them." As they walked back into the house, hand in hand, Aditya felt a deep sense of gratitude for his family, for the work they were doing, and for the unexpected blessings that had come even from their darkest moments. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, as a family, and as part of the larger family they had built through the foundation. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility. And with Priya by his side, her young face alight with plans and dreams, Aditya felt ready to embrace whatever that future might bring. The months following the crisis were a time of intense activity and growth for the Sharma Foundation. The transparency measures they had implemented during the audit became a permanent part of their operations, setting a new standard for accountability in the non-profit sector. Other organizations began to follow suit, leading to a wave of reforms across the industry. Aditya found himself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant, sharing the lessons they had learned about ethical leadership and organizational resilience. But he was careful to balance these new responsibilities with his commitment to the Foundation's core work and to his family. Priya, true to her word, had thrown herself into supporting the Foundation's mission. With her parents' guidance, she started a youth advisory board, bringing together children from diverse backgrounds to provide input on the Foundation's programs and to develop new initiatives. One crisp autumn morning, Aditya arrived at the Foundation's main office to find an unusual level of excitement among the staff. Curious, he made his way to the conference room, where a crowd had gathered around a television. "What's going on?" he asked, peering over shoulders to see the screen. "It's Priya, sir," one of the staff members said, her voice filled with pride. "She's testifying before the Parliamentary Committee on Child Welfare." Aditya's heart swelled as he watched his daughter on the screen. At 15, Priya carried herself with a poise and confidence that belied her years. But it was the passion in her voice that truly captivated her audience. "We cannot continue to treat child welfare as an afterthought," Priya was saying, her clear voice ringing through the committee chamber. "Every child deserves not just the basics of survival, but the opportunity to thrive, to dream, to reach their full potential." As Priya continued, outlining specific policy recommendations developed by her youth advisory board, Aditya felt a hand slip into his. He turned to see Sunita beside him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pride. "She's amazing," Sunita whispered. "I can hardly believe that's our little girl up there." Aditya squeezed her hand, his own eyes misty. "She's not so little anymore," he replied softly. "But yes, she's incredible." As they watched Priya field questions from the committee members with grace and intelligence, Aditya reflected on how far they had come. From that fateful day when he had first seen Priya on the street, to the challenges they had faced building the foundation, to this moment, watching their daughter become a powerful advocate for change in her own right. The ripples of their work were spreading farther than they had ever imagined. The Foundation's model was being studied and replicated in other cities, other countries. Their advocacy had led to significant policy changes, strengthening protections for vulnerable children and increasing resources for education and social services. But perhaps the most profound change was in the lives of the individual children they had helped. Aditya thought of Rahul, one of the first boys they had rescued from the streets, who was now studying engineering on a full scholarship, of Meera, who had overcome years of abuse to become a counselor, helping other survivors heal, of countless others who had found hope, safety, and the chance for a better future through the Foundation's programs. As Priya concluded her testimony to a round of applause, Aditya felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had accomplished so much, but there was still so much more to do. The fight for children's rights and welfare was far from over. But looking around at his team, at Sunita by his side and at Priya on the screen, poised, passionate and determined to make a difference, Aditya knew they were equal to the challenge. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, driven by love, compassion and an unwavering commitment to creating a world where every child had the chance to shine. As the broadcast ended and the room erupted in cheers and congratulations, Aditya's phone buzzed with a message from Priya. "How did I do, Papa? Are you and Mama proud?" With fingers trembling slightly from emotion, Aditya typed back, "More proud than we can ever express, Beta. You're changing the world, one speech at a time. We love you so much." As he hit send, Aditya felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him, for the twists of fate that had brought Priya into their lives, for the challenges that had strengthened their resolve, and for the countless individuals who had joined them in their mission along the way. The journey had been difficult, often painful, but looking at where they were now, at the lives they had touched and the changes they had set in motion, Aditya knew without a doubt that it had all been worth it, and the best was yet to come. The parliamentary hearing where Priya testified proved to be a turning point, not just for the Sharma Foundation, but for the entire landscape of child welfare in India. Her impassioned plea, backed by solid data and practical policy recommendations, struck a chord with lawmakers and the public alike. In the weeks that followed, a groundswell of support began to build. Social media buzzed with clips of Priya's testimony, shared by celebrities and ordinary citizens alike. Hashtags like "Every Child Matters" and "Child Welfare" now trended for days. Grassroots organizations across the country reported a surge in volunteers and donations. Aditya found himself navigating this new wave of attention with a mixture of excitement and caution. While the increased visibility was bringing much-needed resources and support to their cause, he was acutely aware of the backlash they had faced in the past. He knew that there were still powerful interests that would prefer to see their work silenced. It was Sunita who suggested they seize the moment to push for comprehensive reform. "We've been fighting this battle piece by piece for years," she argued during a late-night strategy session. "Maybe it's time to think bigger." And so, with input from legal experts, child psychologists, educators, and most importantly from children and families themselves, the Sharma Foundation began to draft what they called the Child First Initiative, a comprehensive package of legislative and policy reforms aimed at revolutionizing child welfare in India. The initiative called for everything from increased funding for education and healthcare to stricter penalties for child exploitation. It proposed new systems for early intervention in at-risk families, expanded mental health support for children who had experienced trauma, and innovative programs to break the cycle of poverty that often led to child labor and trafficking. As word of the initiative spread, a coalition began to form around it. Other NGOs, academic institutions, and even some forward-thinking corporations threw their support behind the proposal. Priya's Youth Advisory Board played a crucial role, ensuring that the voices and perspectives of young people were centered in every aspect of the plan. But as momentum built, so did the opposition. Conservative politicians decried the initiative as too radical, too expensive. Some religious leaders claimed it would undermine traditional family structures, and in the shadows, the criminal networks that profited from child exploitation began to mobilize, spreading disinformation and using their influence to pressure key decision-makers. The turning point came on a sweltering summer day, as Parliament prepared to vote on whether to move forward with debate on the Child First initiative. Supporters and opponents had gathered outside the Parliament building, their competing chants creating a cacophony of sound. Aditya, Sunita and Priya stood at the heart of the crowd of supporters, surrounded by children and families whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. The atmosphere was tense, the outcome far from certain. As they waited for news of the vote, a commotion near the edge of the crowd caught Aditya's attention. He saw a group of men pushing their way through, their faces twisted with anger. With a jolt of recognition, he realized it was the same group that had threatened him at the shelter years ago. Time seemed to slow as Aditya watched the men approach, their intentions clear in their clenched fists and narrowed eyes. He moved to place himself between them and his family, his heart pounding. But before the men could reach them, something unexpected happened. The crowd of supporters, seeing the threat, closed ranks around the Sharma family. Children, parents, volunteers, people from all walks of life who had been touched by the Foundation's work, formed a human barrier, their faces set with determination. The would-be attackers faltered, clearly unprepared for this show of solidarity. As they hesitated, police officers who had been monitoring the crowd moved in, quickly diffusing the situation. As the tension dissipated, Aditya looked around in awe at the people surrounding them, people who had once been strangers, but who now stood united in a common cause. He saw in their faces the same determination, the same hope for a better future that had driven him and Sunita all these years. It was at that moment that a cheer went up from the Parliament building. The vote had passed. The Child First initiative would move forward to full debate and consideration. As the crowd erupted in celebration, Aditya pulled Sunita and Priya close. "We did it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "All of us together." Priya, her eyes shining with tears of joy, looked up at her parents. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked. Aditya nodded, feeling a profound sense of both accomplishment and responsibility. "Yes, beta, we've won a battle, but the real work is still ahead. Passing the initiative, implementing it, making sure it really changes lives. That's going to take all of us working together." As the family embraced, surrounded by the joyful crowd, Aditya felt a sense of hope stronger than anything he had experienced since that fateful day when he first saw Priya on the street. They had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, weathered storms that threatened to tear them apart. But they had emerged stronger, their resolve tempered by adversity, their impact magnified by the community they had built. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more obstacles to overcome. But in that moment, as the sun began to set over the celebrating crowd, Aditya knew with unshakable certainty that they were on the right path. Together, they had set in motion changes that would ripple out for generations to come, touching countless lives and reshaping the future of their nation. As they made their way home that evening, exhausted but exhilarated, Aditya reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From one small act of kindness on a Mumbai street to a nationwide movement for change, it was more than he could have ever imagined. But looking at Priya, confident and passionate, ready to take on the world, and at Sunita, his partner in everything, Aditya realized that this had been their destination all along. Not an end point, but a new beginning, a launching pad for even greater changes to come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever victories or setbacks awaited them, Aditya knew they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, with love, courage, and an unwavering commitment to making the world a little bit better, one child at a time. As the years passed, the impact of the Child First initiative began to ripple through Indian society in ways both big and small. New schools sprung up in underserved communities, staffed by passionate educators trained in trauma-informed care. Healthcare clinics specializing in pediatric and adolescent needs became a common sight, even in the most remote villages. The criminal networks that had once preyed on vulnerable children found their operations disrupted at every turn by stringent new laws and vigilant enforcement. But for Aditya and Sunita Sharma, now in their 60s, the most profound changes were the ones they saw in individual lives. The children who had grown up under the Foundation's care, now adults making their own marks on the world. On a warm spring afternoon, The Sharma family gathered in their garden for a special celebration. It was the 20th anniversary of the day Priya had come into their lives, and they had invited many of the people who had been part of their journey to join them. Aditya looked around the crowded garden with a sense of wonder. There was Rahul, the boy they had rescued from the streets all those years ago, now a successful engineer working on sustainable housing projects for low-income communities. Meera, once a traumatized child, stood confident and radiant, sharing stories of her work as a child psychologist. Dozens of others milled about, former street children, volunteers, staff members, all part of the extended family that had grown around the Foundation's mission. At the center of it all was Priya, now a poised and accomplished young woman of 26. She had recently been appointed as the youngest ever advisor to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, a testament to her tireless advocacy and the global impact of the Sharma Foundation's work. As Aditya watched Priya move through the crowd, greeting old friends and making new ones, he felt a profound sense of pride and gratitude. She had come so far from the frightened little girl they had brought home 2 decades ago. Yet in her warmth, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to helping others, he could still see echoes of that child who had touched their hearts so deeply. Sunita appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about, my love?" she asked, following his gaze to their daughter. Aditya smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are," he replied softly, "and how much good can come from one small act of kindness." As if sensing their gaze, Priya looked up and caught their eye. With a warm smile, she excused herself from her conversation and made her way over to her parents. "Papa, Mama," she said, embracing them both. "Thank you for all of this, for everything." Aditya felt a lump form in his throat. "No, beta," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, you've taught us so much. You've made us better people, a better family, and look at all the lives you've touched." Priya's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked around the garden. "We did this together," she said, "all of us. And there's still so much more to do." As they stood there, arms around each other, Aditya reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. There had been challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt and fear, but there had also been joy, triumph, and a love deeper than anything he had ever known. The Sharma Foundation had grown beyond anything they could have imagined that day on the streets of Mumbai. It now operated in countries around the world, its model of holistic child welfare and community empowerment replicated and adapted to diverse cultures and contexts. The Child First initiative had sparked similar reforms in nations across the globe, creating a ripple effect of positive change. But as Aditya looked at the faces around him, at Priya, at Sunita, at all the lives they had touched and been touched by in return, he knew that this was their true legacy. Not the programs or the policies, important as they were, but the connections they had forged, the love they had nurtured, the hope they had kindled in countless hearts. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Aditya felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. Whatever the future held, whatever new challenges or opportunities might arise, he knew that the foundation they had built, of love, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the welfare of children, would endure. In that moment, surrounded by family, both biological and chosen, Aditya Sharma knew with absolute certainty that their journey had only just begun. The seeds they had planted would continue to grow, to flourish, to spread hope and change for generations to come. And it had all started with one small act of kindness on a busy Mumbai street. A reminder that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, one person, one family, one community could make a difference. That love, when nurtured and shared, had the power to transform not just individual lives, but the very fabric of society. As the celebration continued around them, Aditya, Sunita, and Priya stood together, their hearts full of gratitude for the past and hope for the future. They had faced their share of storms, but they had weathered them together, and in doing so they had created something beautiful, enduring, and profoundly meaningful, a legacy of love that would continue to touch lives and inspire change for years to come. As the 20th anniversary celebration wound down, Aditya found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the garden. The sounds of laughter and conversation faded into a gentle murmur as he settled onto a bench, gazing out at the Mumbai skyline bathed in the soft glow of twilight. He felt rather than saw Sunita and Priya join him, one on either side. For a long moment they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. It was Priya who finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft but filled with purpose, "about the future. About where we go from here." Aditya turned to look at his daughter, struck once again by the strength and wisdom he saw in her eyes. "What are you thinking, Beta?" he asked. Priya took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "I want to expand our work," she said, "not just geographically, but in scope. I think it's time we started addressing the root causes of child vulnerability more directly." Sunita leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean, exactly?" "Climate change," Priya replied. "Economic inequality, political instability. These are the forces that are going to shape the lives of children in the coming decades. If we really want to protect children, to give them a chance at a better future, we need to be working on these bigger issues too." Aditya felt a mixture of pride and trepidation at his daughter's words. She was right, of course. The challenges facing children were evolving, becoming more complex and interconnected. But taking on such massive global issues, it was a daunting prospect. "It's ambitious," he said carefully. "Maybe too ambitious. We've accomplished a lot, but these are problems that have stumped governments and international organizations for years." Priya nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "I know," she said, "but think about where we started, Papa. One child on a street corner. And look at how far we've come, how many lives we've touched. We did that by believing that change was possible, by refusing to accept that any child was beyond help." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the garden where their guests still mingled, living testaments to the power of that belief. "Why stop now? Why not dream even bigger?" Sunita reached out, taking Priya's hand in hers. "She's right, Aditya," she said softly. "The world is changing. If we want to continue making a difference, we need to change with it." Aditya looked from his wife to his daughter, feeling a familiar spark of excitement kindle in his chest. They were right, both of them. The path ahead would be challenging, perhaps even more so than anything they had faced before. But hadn't that always been true? Hadn't every step of their journey seemed impossible until they took it? "All right," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Let's do it. Let's dream bigger." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to twinkle overhead, the Sharma family began to plan. They talked of partnering with environmental organizations to address the impact of climate change on vulnerable communities, of working with economists and policymakers to develop new models for equitable growth and wealth distribution, of leveraging technology and social media to build global movements for change. The road ahead would be long and often difficult. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But as Aditya sat there with his family, he felt a sense of hope and possibility stronger than anything he had experienced since that fateful day 20 years ago. They had started with one child, one family, one small act of kindness. And from that seed, they had grown a movement that had touched countless lives, that had reshaped policies and changed the very way society thought about its most vulnerable members. Who knew what the next 20 years might bring? What new horizons they might reach, what new lives they might touch, what new changes they might set in motion. As the night deepened around them, Aditya, Sunita and Priya sat together, their hearts full of love, gratitude and hope for the future. They had faced their share of storms, but they had weathered them together. And in doing so, they had created something beautiful, enduring and profoundly meaningful, a legacy of love and compassion that would continue to grow, to evolve, to inspire change for generations to come. The journey that had begun with one small girl on a Mumbai street corner was far from over. In many ways, Aditya realized it was only just beginning. But whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever victories or setbacks awaited them, he knew they would face them as they had faced everything else. Together, with love, courage, and an unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. One child, one family, one community at a time. As they finally rose to rejoin their guests, Aditya felt a profound sense of peace and purpose wash over him. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility. And with his family by his side, With the strength of the community they had built, he knew that they were ready to meet that future head-on, to continue writing new chapters in their ongoing story of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of love. The night sky above them was alive with stars, each one a pinpoint of light in the vast darkness. To Aditya, they seemed to mirror the countless lives they had touched, each one a spark of hope, of potential, of change. And as he looked at Sunita and Priya, he saw that same light shining in their eyes, a light that had the power to illuminate even the darkest corners of the world. Together, they turned back towards the warmth and laughter of the gathering, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. For they knew that as long as they held on to their love for each other and their commitment to making a difference, anything was possible. The best was yet to come. Like this video and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.